John Miller had lived near the edge of the woods for most of his life, long enough to understand the way mornings settled in this part of the valley. At 62, retired from carpentry and carrying the stiffness that comes with years of physical work, he kept a simple habit: a walk along the creek each dawn. It helped loosen his joints, clear his head, and remind him that the world still held small, steady rhythms he could count on. The forest greeted him the same way it always did: quiet, cold, and unhurried. The kind of morning where the air seemed to sit heavy between the trees, and even the birds waited before starting their day. Nothing looked out of place. No broken branches, no disturbed brush, just the familiar path he knew well. John walked the bank at his usual pace, not fast, not slow, just steady. The creek beside him moved in a narrow ribbon, its surface smooth enough to catch the faint, early light. There was nothing dramatic about it, nothing that demanded attention. It was simply part of his routine, as ordinary as his first cup of coffee. He paused now and then to stretch his back or watch the water roll over a shallow patch of stones. Life had become quieter with age, and he found a kind of comfort in that. Out here, the world felt predictable, but that quiet was about to shift, and the creek he trusted would show him something he never expected to witness. John continued along the narrow bend of the creek, his boots pressing softly into the damp soil. The morning still held its usual quiet, the kind that settled into a person's chest and made them feel a little lighter. He had walked this route for years and could tell the difference between every ordinary sound the woods offered. That was why the sudden splash caught him off guard. It wasn't the gentle roll of water shifting over stones or the dip of a passing bird landing near the bank. This sound was abrupt, uneven, as if something had struck the surface with force. John stopped. He tilted his head slightly, listening the way a man does when he knows something isn't right. For a moment, nothing followed. Only the slow movement of the creek. He almost convinced himself it had been a branch falling or a fish jumping close to the bank, but then it came again, sharper, louder, carrying a strain that made the hairs on his neck lift. It wasn't normal. It wasn't accidental. Something was struggling. John looked toward the thicker brush near the deeper stretch of the creek. The sound had come from that direction. He felt a small jolt of concern tighten in his chest. An injured deer, maybe. He had seen that before, animals slipping into the water and fighting to get out. At his age, running never made sense. But concern pushed him to shorten the distance quicker than usual. He walked with steady, deliberate steps, keeping his eyes on the water ahead. The splashing came again, weaker this time, as if whatever was making it was losing strength. John's breath grew slow and focused. Whatever waited ahead wasn't ordinary, and he could feel it. John stepped closer to the deeper stretch of the creek, the place where the water curved sharply and gathered speed. The brush along the bank thinned just enough for him to see the surface clearly. That was when he spotted it, a small shape thrashing weakly in the current. At first, he thought it was a child. The size matched, the movement matched. But something about it didn't look right. Its arms were shorter, thicker. The body was covered in a dark, waterlogged coat that clung tightly to its skin. The longer he looked, the more his mind rejected the idea of it being human. The creature turned slightly as the water rolled it, revealing a face for only a second before it slipped back under. That small glimpse was enough. It wasn't a child at all. It was a baby Bigfoot. John froze. His brain fought to understand what his eyes had seen. He'd heard stories over the years, tales told in hunting cabins or whispered by old-timers who swore the woods held secrets, but he had never given them much weight. Yet here it was, arms flailing, head barely lifting above the waterline. The baby let out a weak, choking sound, more like a strained gasp than a cry. Its mouth dipped under the surface again, and this time it didn't come back up right away. The current pulled it toward the deeper center, where the water moved faster and colder. John didn't think. His body simply reacted. He stepped into the creek, the shock of the freezing water hitting him up to the thighs. His breath cut short, but he pushed forward. Each step slower than he wished it could be. The current tugged at his legs, but he kept moving, eyes locked on the small, sinking figure. The baby's head surfaced for a moment before rolling sideways again, exhaustion overtaking whatever instinct kept it fighting. John lunged forward, stretching his arm through the rushing water. His fingers brushed the creature's shoulder on the first reach but missed. He pushed in farther, water now up to his waist, and grabbed hold of the small, soaked body just as it slipped under again. He pulled it tightly to his chest and turned toward the bank, the weight surprising him. It wasn't heavy like a human child, it was denser, warmer, trembling. John held it firmly, knowing one thing clearly as he struggled back to dry ground. Whatever this creature was, it was alive because he got there in time. John reached the bank with the small creature held firmly against his chest. He knelt on the wet ground, breathing hard from the cold and the effort. The baby Bigfoot hung limp in his arms, its fur dripping and tangled, its chest rising only in thin, shallow breaths. For a moment, John feared he had been too late. He laid the little body on a patch of grass near the edge of the creek and gently tilted its head to clear the airway, the way he had once been taught during a first aid course decades earlier. The baby's eyes fluttered, but it made no sound. Its breathing was faint and uneven. Each inhale a small struggle. "Come on now," John murmured quietly, though he knew the creature wouldn't understand the words. "Stay with me." He pressed 2 fingers lightly against the chest, giving small, rhythmic pushes. Water trickled from the baby's mouth. John repeated the motion, steady and patient, refusing to panic. He had worked with his hands his entire life, repairing, fixing, rebuilding. He approached this moment the same way, calm, deliberate, focused. After several tense seconds, the baby's body jerked slightly. A weak cough escaped its throat, followed by a thin wheeze of air. John let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He lifted the creature gently and tucked it under his jacket to keep it warm. The small hands, barely bigger than his palm, clung weakly to the fabric. The trembling slowly eased as warmth returned to its body. "There you go," John whispered, keeping his voice low and steady. "You're all right now." The baby's breathing steadied, though it remained fragile and soft. Its eyes half opened, revealing dark, unfocused pupils that flicked toward John's face for the briefest moment before closing again. It wasn't fear he saw, just exhaustion. John shifted to sit against a nearby fallen log, keeping the creature close, letting his body heat transfer through the damp layers. Steam rose faintly from the soaked fur in the cool air. As he held the baby, he glanced around the tree line, suddenly aware of how alone he was and how unlikely it was that this baby had been out here without someone, or something, looking for it, whatever had left this infant behind. John had a feeling it wasn't far. John kept the baby tucked inside his jacket, feeling its small breaths press faintly against his chest. The creature had stopped, trembling as violently, but its strength was far from steady. He knew he couldn't move it far until it warmed up more. For now, he stayed seated against the fallen log, catching his own breath and letting his body adjust to the cold creek water soaked into his clothes. When the baby shifted slightly, John adjusted his hold. Something about the movement made him glance down toward the muddy ground near the water's edge. That was when he noticed a mark in the soil, a deep, wide impression spaced farther apart than any human step could ever reach. A footprint. He leaned forward, careful not to disturb the baby. The print was large enough to cover both of his hands placed side by side. The toes were spread wide, the edges clean and fresh. Another print sat a short distance away, angled as if whatever made them had moved quickly along the bank. John's breath grew heavier, not from fear, but from the realization settling over him. The infant he pulled from the water hadn't wandered here by accident. Someone or something had been here before him. He slowly stood, keeping the baby close. As he stepped around the bank, he spotted more tracks leading up from the creek. Some were deeper, as though made by a heavy, hurried step. Others were lighter, but still unmistakably large. He followed the line of impressions with his eyes. They stopped abruptly a few yards ahead, disappearing into the brush. John scanned the trees. The forest was still too still. No wind, no birds, no small rustle of wildlife. It was as if everything had paused to watch him. He couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on him, somewhere beyond the shadows. Not hostile, but anxious, Searching, John stepped back toward the fallen log and slowly lowered himself again. Moving too quickly or too far didn't feel wise. If the creature that left those tracks was a parent, it would return. A mother never left her young for long. He held the baby closer, its warm breath touching his chest. Whoever made those footprints was near and getting closer. John held the baby tightly against his chest, his own breathing steadying after the cold shock of the creek. He had just begun to relax when movement in the tree line caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a shadow shifting with the morning light. But then the shape became unmistakable. A large, dark figure emerged between the trees. Nearly 8 feet tall, it moved cautiously, each step deliberate. Water dripped from its fur, and the creature shivered visibly with every movement. John froze, unsure whether to stand or remain still. The figure paused at the edge of the clearing, revealing itself fully. A female Bigfoot. Her eyes locked on the infant in John's arms. There was no hostility there, only fear and desperation. Her legs trembled as she shifted her weight, and a long gash on one of her limbs was clear even from a distance. She had been searching for the baby, and every movement suggested exhaustion and pain. John's heart thudded in his chest. He had imagined encounters with Bigfoot in stories, but never like this. There were no growls, no sudden charges, only careful, deliberate steps. The creature lowered herself to the ground slowly, her posture tense but controlled, as if she were trying not to alarm the baby further. Her breathing came in shallow, shaky pulls. She reached forward slightly with one hand, watching the infant, then pulled it back as if uncertain. Every motion was heavy with caution and a silent plea. She wanted her child, but she didn't yet understand John's intentions. The moment hung in the air, quiet except for the soft rustle of water dripping from her fur and the faint sound of the baby's breathing. John stayed perfectly still, holding the small creature close and keeping his voice low. The mother Bigfoot's eyes never left the infant. Her entire being radiated vulnerability, not aggression. John realized then that this was not a threat, it was a parent in pain, desperate to be reunited with her child. He waited, calm and patient, understanding that trust could not be rushed. The female Bigfoot crouched low, her massive form tense but controlled, eyes locked on the small infant John held. Every muscle in her body seemed to hum with quiet urgency. She leaned forward slightly, then recoiled, unsure. Her gaze never left the baby, but the caution in her movements told John she was weighing each decision carefully. John stayed still, holding the creature gently against his chest. He spoke softly, almost whispering, though he knew the words meant nothing to her. "It's all right. You're safe." His tone carried no fear. No sudden movements, only calm reassurance. He could feel the baby's small body trembling, and he adjusted his hold, tucking it closer to his warmth. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the mother took a tentative step forward. She lowered one large, damp hand toward the infant. John froze, allowing the moment to unfold on its own. The baby stirred, eyes fluttering open, and for the first time, met the gaze of its mother. A low, quivering sound left her throat, somewhere between a sigh and a murmur. John could sense her relief, but also her lingering fear both for the child and for the stranger holding it. The infant responded. Its tiny fingers reached out weakly, brushing against John's hand. Then, slowly, the mother nudged the baby with her hand. Careful and deliberate, the movement was gentle, almost ritualistic, and the infant's chest rose with easier breaths. It opened its eyes wider, peering at John, then back at her. The connection was immediate and raw, a bond of trust forming in the cold morning air. John exhaled quietly, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. He understood then that the creature was not hostile. She was wary, yes, but her focus was singular, her child. The mother Bigfoot leaned closer again, lowering her head and meeting John's gaze for a brief instant. There was no anger, no threat, only recognition, a silent acknowledgement that he had saved a life that mattered more than any words could convey. Time seemed to pause. The baby rested against John's chest, still weak but breathing steadily, while the mother observed quietly. Her low, trembling murmurs filled the space between them, soft and almost human in their rhythm. The first true trust had been earned not through gestures, not through speech, but through calm, deliberate care. John remained still, heart steady. Knowing the moment was fragile, he had been entrusted with something rare, something sacred. The mother Bigfoot had begun to understand. He was not a threat. And in that understanding, the first thread of trust had been woven. As the mother Bigfoot watched her infant settle, John's eyes caught something he hadn't noticed before. A long, deep cut ran across her leg, jagged and raw from some sharp rock or fallen branch. She shifted her weight carefully, wincing but refusing to move away from her child. The wound was serious enough to slow her down, enough to make her vulnerable, yet she remained crouched, focused entirely on the baby, ignoring the pain that must have seared through her leg. John swallowed. At his age, he knew the difference between a minor injury and one that could endanger a life. This was serious. The forest was full of unseen dangers, predators, hidden roots, slippery banks. She couldn't move far without risk, and the infant was still weak. He realized he couldn't simply wait and hope they would be safe. He had to act. Slowly, deliberately, John moved closer. He kept his hands visible, palms open, speaking softly, though she could not understand the words. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said in a calm voice. "Let me help." The mother stiffened at first, shifting back slightly, but the trust forged in the previous moments held. She didn't flee. She watched, tense but silent, her eyes flicking between John and her baby. John tore a strip from his own shirt, wet and heavy but functional. He knelt beside her, careful not to make sudden movements. Gently, he wrapped the cloth around the wound, applying light pressure to slow the bleeding. The creature's breathing quickened, a low murmur escaping her throat. But she didn't resist. She understood, in her own way, that he meant no harm. He held the makeshift bandage in place for a moment, then stepped back slightly, still keeping the baby within reach. The mother lowered herself onto her side, leaning against a tree for support. She exhaled, small tremors running through her massive frame, but her gaze never left her infant. John nodded slightly, a silent reassurance. He knew they would leave soon, together, back into the safety of the deeper woods. For now, his role was clear. He had been trusted to protect them, and he had chosen to do so without hesitation. In that moment, the bond between them, fragile, unspoken, and profoundly human, grew stronger. The mother Bigfoot gently lifted her infant, holding it close against her chest. The small body, still damp and fragile, nestled into the curve of her arms. John watched quietly, aware that this moment would mark the end of their encounter. He remained seated on the damp ground, holding the last warmth of contact in his hands, his gaze fixed on the pair. She took a tentative step toward the trees, the weight of her injury evident in each careful movement. The forest awaited her, dark and dense beyond the clearing, yet she moved with purpose, driven by the instinctive need to return her child to safety. The infant stirred faintly, curling its small hand against her fur, a silent acknowledgement of reunion and trust. John remained still, knowing better than to speak or approach. Every motion, every breath, had to be deliberate. Any sudden gesture could shatter the fragile understanding between them. Time seemed to stretch. The morning quiet punctuated only by the distant trickle of the creek and the soft rustle of leaves. Then she paused, her massive head tilted slightly, and for the first time, her eyes met John's directly. There was something in that gaze, gratitude, recognition, a silent communication that no words could carry. Slowly, she reached out, one enormous hand brushing lightly against his shoulder. The touch was brief, but it carried weight far greater than any human gesture. Acknowledgement of the life he had saved, and of the care he had shown. The infant lifted a tiny hand toward him as well, weak but deliberate. Before resting again against her, John felt the warmth, the connection, and understood that even this small, tentative gesture was a thank you, in its purest form. Without another movement, the mother turned back toward the forest. She stepped carefully over roots and brush, her child cradled safely in her arms. The massive silhouette disappeared between the trees, silent and composed, leaving John alone in the clearing once more. He exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from his body. The morning light caught on the creek, glinting over smooth stones, and he realized that though the encounter was over, the memory of it would remain vivid, unshakable, and quietly profound. John rose, brushing dirt and leaves from his clothes, and for a moment he lingered at the edge of the clearing. He had witnessed something rare, something beyond words, and in that silent farewell, he understood fully the fragile, unspoken bond that had formed a trust between a human and a creature the world would never believe. John walked back along the creek alone, the morning sunlight filtering softly through the trees. The air had warmed slightly, but he still felt the chill of the creek water lingering in his clothes and in his bones. His hands were empty now, the infant safe in the arms of its mother, gone into the dense forest where no human would follow. And yet, the weight of the experience remained, pressing gently against his chest. He didn't speak of what had happened. He knew that no one would believe him, not the neighbors, not his old friends, not even those who shared tales of the woods. Some stories, he realized, are too fragile for words. Some encounters are meant only for memory, carried quietly through the years. Still, he returned to the creek often. Sometimes he paused at the edge of the water, letting his gaze follow the path the mother and child had taken, hoping for a glimpse of movement, a sign that they were safe. On rare mornings, he noticed small gestures. A flower placed carefully on a stone near the spot where he had pulled the baby from the water. A flattened patch of grass where it seemed someone had rested briefly. He knew, deep in his heart, who had left them. Those memories did not fade. They remained vivid, alive in a way that surprised him. He could still feel the soft weight of the infant in his arms, the tremor of its tiny fingers, the way the mother's eyes had met his, a quiet acknowledgement that no words could carry. John understood then that some moments are rare, precious, and enduring. They are not measured in days or years, but in the lasting effect they leave on the heart. And though the mother and child were gone, he felt their presence in the creek, in the forest, in the soft rustle of leaves on a quiet morning. Some memories fade with age, but not the ones where a life was placed in your hands, entrusted to you for a brief, sacred moment. John walked home slowly, carrying that memory with him, alive and unbroken.